He raised a leopard from birth, and what happened when they reunited in the wild shocked everyone. As a boy, he secretly cared for a fragile cub, forging a bond no one believed could last. Years later, when a predator begins terrorizing the land, hunters are sent to destroy it. But the man who once saved its life knows the truth, and he'll risk everything to find the animal before the bullets do. What no one expects is the hidden scheme driving the hunt, a scheme that could cost him his career, his life, and the only connection that ever truly mattered. In the wilderness, loyalty and survival collide. When a boy's childhood secret becomes a man's most dangerous fight, what will happen when he stands between a leopard and those who want it dead? Before we dive in, drop your name or city in the comments. It reminds me that behind every view is a real heartbeat. The Montana winter had settled deep into 11-year-old Caleb Brooks' bones as he trudged through the knee-deep snow toward the barn. His breath came out in white puffs in the early morning air, and his worn work boots crunched against the frozen ground. The familiar smell of hay and horses greeted him as he pulled open the heavy wooden door, ready to start his morning chores. But something was different that day. A soft whimpering sound caught his attention from behind the hay bales. Caleb's heart quickened as he moved closer, pushing aside the scratchy yellow straw. There, curled up in a tight ball, was a leopard cub no bigger than a house cat. Her spotted fur was matted and dirty, and her sides heaved with each shallow breath. "Hey there," Caleb whispered, keeping his voice gentle. The cub's eyes, bright, golden circles in her small face, fixed on him with a mix of fear and desperation. She was skin and bones beneath her beautiful coat. "You must be so hungry." Without hesitation, Caleb ran to the house and snuck into the kitchen. His father was already out working the far pasture, and he knew he had to act fast. He grabbed an old baby bottle his mother had kept from when his little sister was young, and filled it with warm milk, dropped back in the barn. The cub watched him warily as he approached. "It's okay," he soothed, holding out the bottle. "I won't hurt you." To his surprise, the cub didn't run. Instead, she stretched her neck forward and sniffed at the bottle before latching on desperately as she drank. Caleb's mind raced. He couldn't leave her out in the open barn. His father would find her for sure. Behind the tack room, there was an unused storage space. Working quickly between his regular chores, Caleb created a cozy den with old horse blankets and boards. "I'll call you Selah," he told the cub as he settled her into her new home. The name had come from his mother's old Bible, and something about it just felt right. It means pause and listen. For weeks, Caleb maintained his secret. He would wake up extra early to feed Selah before starting his chores, sneaking milk and bits of meat from the kitchen. The cub grew stronger each day, her personality emerging as she gained strength. She would pounce on his shoelaces and roll onto her back for belly rubs, just like a kitten. But there was always a wild grace about her, a reminder that she was something magnificent and untamed. His father's words rang in his ears daily. A Rourke man doesn't show weakness. We do what needs to be done, no matter what. But when Caleb looked into Selah's trusting eyes, he knew that compassion wasn't weakness. It was strength of a different kind. As Selah grew, she became more adventurous. She would slip out of her hiding place to explore the barn at night, leaving paw prints in the dust. Caleb's heart would freeze every morning until he found her safely back in her den. But he couldn't keep her confined forever. She was getting too big, too restless. Then came the morning when everything changed. Caleb heard his father's angry shouts before he even reached the barn. Running inside, he found Selah's hiding place discovered, his father standing there with his rifle raised. "What in God's name have you done, boy?" His father's voice was deadly quiet. "Harboring a dangerous animal? Putting the whole ranch at risk?" Before Caleb could respond, trucks came roaring up the driveway. Wildlife authorities alerted by a neighbor who had spotted the leopard. Caleb watched helplessly as they cornered Seela with catch poles and loaded her into a cage. "Please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "She's not dangerous. She's my friend." But no one listened. The last glimpse he had of Seela was her, frightened eyes looking back at him from the cage as they drove away. She would be taken to a wildlife sanctuary, they said. It was for the best, they said. But all Caleb felt was the crushing weight of loss. That evening, his father's punishment was swift and harsh. "No son of mine is going to be some soft-hearted fool," he declared, assigning Caleb extra chores and restricting him to the house when his work was done. But worse than any punishment was the knowledge that he had failed to protect Selah in the empty barn that night. Caleb touched the worn blankets where Selah had slept. His father had been wrong about one thing. Caring wasn't weakness. The pain in his heart proved that loving something deeply took more courage than turning away ever could. He had given Selah a chance at life, and even though losing her hurt more than anything he'd ever experienced, he knew he would do it all again. The spot behind his eyes burned as he gathered up the blankets, taking in one last breath of Selah's wild scent before forcing himself to throw them away. The barn seemed colder now, emptier, but somewhere inside him, Caleb knew that his time with Selah had changed him forever. The mountain air bit cold and sharp as Caleb Rourke studied the ground. Before him, 20 years of tracking had taught him to read the earth like a book, each broken twig and displaced pebble telling its own story. His weathered hands, marked with tiny scars from years in the wilderness, traced the edge of a massive paw print. Pressed deep into the mud, "What have you got, Rourke?" called Dave Mitchell, one of the local ranchers, his voice tight with worry. Caleb didn't answer right away. His eyes traced the pattern of tracks, his mind already piecing together the predator's path. The prints were fresh, maybe 6 hours old. The stride length and depth suggested something big, much bigger than the typical mountain lion or wolf that usually prowled these parts. "Well," Dave pressed, shifting nervously on his feet. "Give me a minute," Caleb said quietly, his voice carrying the patience learned from countless hours in the wild. He stood slowly, his lean frame unfolding. As he surveyed the gruesome scene before them, the cattle carcass lay torn and broken, its death speaking of tremendous power. But there was something about the kill that nagged at him, something familiar. Back in his truck, Caleb filed his preliminary report, his fingers hesitating over the keyboard. 3 cattle deaths in the past week, all showing the same signature. The ranching community was in an uproar, demanding action. His superiors at the wildlife department wanted answers, and they wanted them fast. "You're the best tracker we've got, Rourke," his boss had said that morning. "Find whatever's doing this and deal with it, permanently." Those words echoed in his head as he studied the photos on his laptop screen. The bike pattern, the way the prey had been taken down, it all pointed to one conclusion he didn't want to face. His mind drifted back 20 years to a small barn and a tiny leopard cub with trusting eyes. The radio crackled to life. "Rourke, you copy?" "Got another incident reported up by Miller's Creek." "Copy that," he responded, his throat tight. "En route." As he drove through the gathering dusk, his father's voice whispered in his head, harsh and unforgiving. "Caring makes you weak, boy. Animals are meant to be used or destroyed, not loved." The new sight confirmed his suspicions. The tracks were clearer here, and his heart nearly stopped when he saw the distinctive scar pattern in one of the prints, a small imperfection he'd recognize anywhere. Selah. Somehow, she'd escaped the sanctuary and made her way back to the only home she'd known. That evening, in his small cabin office, Caleb stared at the blank report form on his computer screen. His superiors were waiting for his assessment, for him to confirm what they all suspected, that a dangerous predator was loose in their jurisdiction. Protocol demanded he reported immediately. Protocol demanded they hunt it down. The phone rang, making him jump. "Rourke," he answered. "We need your report, Caleb," his supervisor, Janet Wheeler, said without preamble. "The ranchers are breathing down our necks. If this is what we think it is, we need to mobilize a response team." Caleb's jaw tightened. "The evidence is inconclusive," he lied, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "I need more time to—" "Time isn't something we have," Janet cut him off. 3 dead cattle in a week, Caleb. Whatever this is, it's escalating. We can't risk human casualties." After hanging up, Caleb pulled out his old leather journal, its pages worn and creased. Inside was a faded photograph of a leopard cub curled up in hay, looking at the camera with bright, trusting eyes. His finger traced the edge of the photo, remembering the feel of her fur, the sound of her purr. The next morning brought a summons to the main office. Caleb found himself facing not just Janet, but the regional director as well. "Your report says inconclusive," the director said, tapping the folder on his desk. "But we've got 3 independent experts saying these kills match leopard predation." "Patterns. Care to explain?" Caleb met their gaze steadily. "The evidence isn't definitive enough to justify a kill order." "This isn't about justification, Rourke," Janet said, her voice sharp. "This is about public safety. If there's a leopard out there, it needs to be put down. End of story." "I won't do it," Caleb said quietly, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "Send someone else if you want, but I won't be part of this hunt." The director leaned forward. "This wouldn't have anything to do with that incident 20 years ago, would it? The leopard cub you illegally harbored?" Caleb's face remained impassive, but his heart raced. They knew. Of course they knew. It would have been in his file when he applied for the job. He stood slowly, his decision already made. "I'll continue tracking and monitoring," he said carefully. "But I won't participate in a kill operation. That's my final word." As he walked out of the office, he could feel the weight of their stares, could practically hear the phones that would start ringing. The moment he left, he'd just painted a target on his back, and he knew it. But somewhere out there, Sela was roaming these mountains. The same cub he'd bottle-fed, the same wild spirit he'd helped save. He couldn't be the one to end her life. In his truck, Caleb pulled out his tracking gear. If he was going to protect Sela, he needed to find her first, before anyone else did. The mountain air bit cold and sharp as Caleb Rourke knelt in the morning frost, studying the ground before him. 20 years of tracking had taught him to read the earth like a book. Each broken twig and displaced stone told a story. His weathered fingers traced a distinct paw print pressed into the mud, large, purposeful, and hauntingly familiar behind him. Angry voices carried across the valley. A group of ranchers had gathered at the Miller property, where their 3rd cow lay dead, its throat torn. Their shouts echoed off the mountainside, demanding justice and blood. "This ain't just any predator kill," Caleb muttered to himself, his jaw tightening. The pattern was unmistakable. The clean kills, the specific territory. His heart squeezed in his chest. Sela. It had to be her. The crowd's volume suddenly increased. Caleb stood, brushing dirt from his knees as a black SUV rolled up the dirt road. Ildon Keene stepped out, his expensive boots crunching on gravel. The cattle baron commanded attention without effort, his broad shoulders squared as he approached. The gathered ranchers. "Friends," Keene's voice boomed across the property. "This situation has gone on long enough. Whatever's killing our livestock needs to be put down. Now." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Caleb watched from the tree line, his face carefully neutral despite the knot forming in his stomach. "I hear our state tracker's been dragging his feet," Keene continued, gesturing toward Caleb. "Maybe he's gone soft. Maybe he's forgotten whose interests he's supposed to protect. The ranchers turned to stare at Caleb, their expressions hardening. He felt the weight of their judgment, their fear turning quickly to anger. It was a familiar sensation, being the outsider, the one who didn't quite fit their mold. "We need proof it's dangerous before we start shooting." A woman's voice cut through the tension. Heads turned as Rachel Vance stepped forward, her field clothes dusty from work. Random killing isn't the answer. Keen's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Dr. Vance, still trying to save every tooth and claw that threatens our livelihood. I'm trying to prevent hysteria from overruling science," Rachel replied evenly. "We don't even know what kind of animal we're dealing with." "We know it's killing our cattle," a rancher shouted. "And it'll be children next," another added. Keen nodded. Gravely, "The lady biologist means well, but this isn't a research project. This is about protecting our community." He turned to Caleb. "So what's it going to be, Rourke? Are you going to do your job, or do we need to handle this ourselves?" Caleb felt the pressure of dozens of eyes on him. In his mind, he saw a scared leopard cub, trust shining in her eyes as she drank from the bottle he held. He saw his father's rage when they took her away. He heard the words that had followed him for 20 years. "Compassion makes you weak, boy." "I'll track it," Caleb said finally, his voice steady. "But we do this right. No hunting parties, no random shooting. Let me find out what we're dealing with first." Keen's expression darkened. "You have 2 days, Rourke. After that, we take matters into our own hands." As the crowd dispersed, Rachel approached Caleb. Her sharp features were softened by concern. "You know something about this animal, don't you?" Caleb hesitated, studying her. Rachel Vance had a reputation for fighting impossible battles, standing up to ranchers and politicians alike in defense of predator species. Her dedication had earned her more enemies than friends in the valley. "Walk with me," he said quietly. They moved away from the crowd, following the tree line. Caleb could feel Keen watching them, but he kept his pace steady. "The kills are too precise," he explained. "Too careful. This isn't a random predator. It's hunting in a specific pattern, staying within a defined territory." Rachel nodded. "You think it's been in captivity before? I know it has." Caleb stopped, turning to face her. 20 years ago, I found a leopard cub in my father's barn. I raised her in secret until they took her to a sanctuary." He swallowed hard. "Her name was Selah." Rachel's eyes widened with understanding. "And now she's back. The patterns match. The territory overlaps with where I used to." He trailed off, the weight of memory heavy in his chest. "Where you used to care for her," Rachel finished softly. Caleb nodded, surprised by how easily she grasped what others would condemn. Keen. "And the others want blood. They don't care about understanding or protecting. They just want to kill." "Then we'll have to find another way," Rachel said firmly. "I have contacts at wildlife sanctuaries. If we can prove she's the same leopard, prove she's not an immediate threat, you'd help me?" Caleb asked, studying her face for any sign of deception. Rachel met his gaze steadily. "Someone needs to stand up to Keen's fear-mongering. And something tells me you understand these animals better than anyone else around here." For the first time in days, Caleb felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly. He wasn't alone in this anymore. But as he looked back toward the valley, where Keen's SUV was pulling away in a cloud of dust, he knew the real fight was just beginning. He would have to find Selah before Keen's men did. And somehow, he would have to prove that the compassion his father had called weakness might be the very thing needed to save her. The mountain air, bit cold and sharp as Caleb Rourke studied the ground before him. 20 years of tracking had taught him to read the earth like a book, each broken twig and displaced stone telling its own story. His weathered fingers traced a distinct paw print pressed into the mud, far too large for a mountain lion, but unmistakably feline. "She's been through here recently," he said softly, glancing up at Rachel Vance, who stood a few feet away, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. "Within the last few hours." Rachel moved closer, her boots crunching on fallen pine needles. "The pattern suggests she's staying within a 10-mile radius," she observed, pulling out her worn field notebook. "That's unusual for a leopard. They typically range much further." "She remembers this area," Caleb replied, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't quite hide. This was her home before. Rachel's warm eyes studied his face with understanding. In the week they'd spent tracking together, she'd learned to read Caleb almost as well as he read the wilderness. "You did what you could for her back then," she said gently. Their conversation was cut short by the distant crack of a rifle. Both instinctively crouched lower, sharing a worried look. Keen's men were getting closer. "We need to move," Caleb whispered, leading them deeper into the cover of the forest. They spent hours following Sela's trail, working their way through dense underbrush and over rocky outcrops. As darkness approached, they made camp in a sheltered hollow. Rachel stirred their small campfire while Caleb spread out his maps. "Keen's really gotten people worked up," she said, handing him a tin cup of coffee. "I heard him on the local radio this morning, calling Sela a bloodthirsty monster." Caleb's jaw tightened. "He's building his own army out there. I counted at least 15 armed men at the general store yesterday." He took a long sip of coffee, the warmth doing little to ease his tension. "This isn't about protecting cattle." Keen's using fear to tighten his grip on the valley. "Like he always has," Rachel agreed, pulling her jacket closer against the evening. "Chill. The people trust you here, Caleb. They know your tracking skills. If you speak up, they trust me to hunt predators, not protect them," he cut in, but his voice held no anger, only sadness. "My father made sure everyone knew how I failed with Sela the first time." Rachel moved closer, her shoulder brushing his. "Compassion isn't failure," she said firmly. "What you did for that cub, that took real strength." Caleb looked at her then, struck by the fierce conviction in her voice. Something warm stirred in his chest, an unfamiliar feeling of being truly seen and understood. Their moment was interrupted by voices carrying through the trees. Keen's men, closer than before. They quickly doused the fire and gathered there. Here, moving silently through the darkness. The moon cast enough light to follow Sela's trail, but it also made them more visible to others. A shot rang out, splintering bark near Caleb's head. He grabbed Rachel's arm, pulling her behind a large boulder. More shots followed, accompanied by shouts. "There they are. Don't let them get away." Caleb recognized the voice, one of Keen's most loyal followers. They scrambled down a steep embankment, using the darkness and terrain to their advantage. When they finally stopped, both breathing hard, they were deep in a thickly wooded valley. "You okay?" Caleb asked, checking Rachel for injuries. She nodded, still catching her breath. "They weren't shooting to kill. They wanted to scare us off." "The trail. It's going to get worse," Caleb said grimly. "Keen won't stop until he either finds Sela or drives every predator out of these mountains." They spent the night taking turns keeping watch, the tension of the hunt hanging heavy in the air. As dawn approached, Rachel touched Caleb's arm, pointing to fresh tracks leading away from their camp. Sela had passed within yards of them while they slept. "She's getting bolder," Rachel whispered, excitement mixing with concern in her voice. "Or more desperate." Caleb studied the tracks, his heart heavy with worry. The leopard was moving in. A pattern he recognized. She was being pushed into a corner, just as Keen intended. The sound of trucks in the distance confirmed his fears. The hunt was no longer just a threat. It had begun in earnest. He looked at Rachel, seeing his own. Determination mirrored in her eyes. They were caught in the middle now, between Sela and the armed men who wanted her dead, between preservation and destruction, between compassion and fear. The choice was clear, even if the path forward was dangerous. "We need to find her first," Caleb said, shouldering his pack. The morning sun cast long shadows through the trees as they set off, following Sela's trail deeper into the wilderness, the sounds of Keen's hunting party echoing behind them like thunder before a storm. The mountain air bit cold and sharp as Caleb Rourke studied the ground before him. His experienced eyes traced subtle marks in the earth, broken twigs, displaced stones, a single dark hair caught on a thorny bush. Sela had passed through here, but something about her trail felt wrong. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, crouching to examine a set of prints more closely. The spacing was irregular, as if the leopard had been disoriented. He'd tracked enough animals to know natural behavior from unnatural, and this pattern screamed of interference. Rachel appeared at his side, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. "What did you find? Look at these tracks." Caleb pointed to the scattered impressions. "They show confusion, almost like she was drugged." And here, he reached for something half buried in the soil, a small metal dart. Its bright orange fletching faded but still visible. Rachel took the dart, turning it over in her hands. "This is a tranquilizer dart from a wildlife management gun, standard issue for sanctuaries and zoos." Her face darkened with concern. But why would it be out here? Because someone wanted her out here. Caleb stood, his jaw tight with anger. Sela didn't escape on her own. Someone set her loose. They spent the next hour combing the area, gathering more evidence. 2 more darts. Tire tracks that didn't belong to Forest Service vehicles. A piece of chain-link fence cut clean through. With bolt cutters, back at their base camp, they spread everything out on a map. Rachel connected to the sanctuary's database on her laptop, pulling up records. "The official report says she broke through a weak spot in the enclosure," she said, frowning at the screen. "But these materials tell a different story. Someone wanted a predator loose in cattle country." Caleb's voice was hard. "Someone who'd benefit from the panic." "Keen," Rachel whispered. "He's been rallying the ranchers, building his influence. A dangerous predator would give him exactly the leverage he needs." As if summoned by his name, Keen's voice crackled over Rachel's radio. He was giving another interview to the local station. "These hills belong to hard-working ranchers," his smooth voice declared. "We won't let our livelihoods be destroyed by monsters. I'm doubling the bounty on that cat's head. $20,000 to whoever brings it down." Caleb's hands clenched into fists. He's playing everyone, creating a crisis so he can solve it. But we don't have solid proof. Rachel gestured at their collected evidence. "This is all circumstantial. We need more. Then we'll get more." Caleb began packing his gear. "But first we need to find Sela before Keen's hunters do. She's just a pawn in his game." The radio continued broadcasting Keen's speech. "This is our land." His voice boomed. "And I promise you, we will rid it of every last threat to our way of life. No cost is too high to protect what's ours." Rachel touched Caleb's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "We'll stop him," she said softly. "We'll prove what he's done." Caleb nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the distant mountains where Sela was hiding. The pieces were falling into place. The suspicious timing, the convenient crisis, Keen's ready-made solution. But understanding the plot didn't make their task any easier. Somewhere out there, a leopard who had once trusted him was running for her life, while the man who had engineered her release was turning the entire community against her. "He won't win," Caleb said finally. "Not this time." The wind carried the sound of distant gunshots. Keen's hunters, already on the move. Time was running out. They needed to find Sela and expose the truth before Keen's manufactured crisis claimed its intended victim. Rachel packed up her laptop, her movements quick but precise. The sanctuary will have security footage from the night Sela disappeared. I have contacts there who might help us access it. Good. Caleb shouldered his pack, checking his compass. I'll keep tracking her, try to stay ahead of Keen's men. We'll meet back here at sunset. As they prepared to separate, both felt the weight of what they'd discovered. This wasn't just about protecting one animal anymore. It was about exposing a calculated scheme that preyed on people's fears. Keen had engineered the perfect crisis, but he hadn't counted on someone caring enough about the truth to dig deeper. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the mountain mist. Somewhere in those hills, a leopard with a distinctive scar was running from a danger she didn't understand, while the man who had once bottle-fed her as a cub raced against time to save her once again. The pieces snapped together like a trap. Rachel's contact at the sanctuary had finally sent the security footage from the night of Sela's disappearance. Caleb and Rachel huddled over a laptop in their makeshift camp, watching grainy images of two sanctuary handlers accepting thick envelopes from a familiar broad-shouldered figure. Keen, Caleb growled, his fingers digging into his knees as they watched the handlers deliberately damage the enclosure's fence. He planned this whole thing. Rachel fast-forwarded through hours of footage until they saw Sela being herded out with strategic prods from tranquilizer guns. He made sure she'd head straight for cow country. Her voice trembled with anger. These handlers, they're supposed to protect these animals. Money talks. Caleb stood up, pacing. And Keen's got plenty of it. But this isn't just about killing one leopard. Look at what he's accomplished since Sela appeared. Rachel pulled out her notebook where she'd been tracking events. 3 smaller ranches have already sold out to him, scared of losing more cattle. The county's considering emergency measures that would give him control over predator management. And his private security force is practically running armed patrols now. He's using Sela to reshape the whole valley. Caleb's voice was bitter. Create a crisis, offer protection, watch everyone fall in line. A branch snapped in the darkness beyond their camp. Caleb spun around, reaching for his rifle, but it was too late. Dark figures emerged from the trees, moving with practiced efficiency. Before he could shout a warning to Rachel, something hard struck the back of his head. He came to with rough hands dragging him across rocky ground. Through blurred vision, he saw Rachel being held back by 2 men while Eldon Keen approached, boots crunching on gravel. You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you, Rourke? Keen's voice carried that same smooth confidence he used in his interviews. Had to go digging where you weren't wanted. Caleb tasted blood in his mouth. People deserve to know what you did. People deserve to feel safe. Keen crouched down, his expensive ranch coat brushing the dirt. They deserve strong leadership. Sometimes that means manufacturing a little crisis to show them who their real protectors are. You're using Sela to steal their land, Caleb spat. I'm building something bigger than your pet cat. Keen stood, brushing off his knees. This valley needs order, structure, one voice calling the shots. Your bleeding heart has no place in that future. He nodded to his men. They dragged Caleb further up the slope, ignoring his struggles. The smell of smoke drifted on the wind. Not a campfire, but something bigger. We've set controlled burns in 3 locations, Keen explained casually. Driving your precious leopard right where we want her, but accidents happen in fire season. Sometimes good men get caught in the wrong place. Caleb fought harder as they tied him to a tree, the rope cutting into his wrists. Through the trees below, he could see the orange glow of advancing flames. Rachel! He shouted, but Keen's men were already leading her away at gunpoint. Be detained somewhere safe until this is over, Keen said. Can't have her spreading inconvenient stories. As for you, he smiled, patting Caleb's cheek with mock affection. "Let's see if that cat of yours still remembers you enough to come save you." The beating that followed was methodical, professional. Keen's men knew how to hurt without killing, leaving Caleb conscious but unable to work his bonds. Through swollen eyes, he watched Keen straighten his coat and check his watch. "The fire should reach you in about 30 minutes, Keen said. "Just enough time for me to establish my alibi at the emergency response meeting. When they find your body, it'll be another tragic example of why we need stronger leadership in these dangerous times." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Rourke, that footage you found?" "Already been deleted from the sanctuary servers. Amazing how cooperative people can be when their jobs are on the line." Caleb slumped against his bonds as Keen and his men departed. Below, the fire was growing, eating its way up the slope. Smoke stung his eyes and throat. He could hear the distant sound of emergency vehicles, all heading to the wrong locations. No doubt, according to Keen's plan, the flames drew closer, pushing waves of heat ahead of them. Somewhere in these hills, Sela was being herded into a trap, while the man who had orchestrated everything prepared to play hero for the cameras. The truth would die here with him, feeding Keen's carefully constructed narrative. Caleb pulled against the ropes until his wrist bled, but the knots held firm. The fire advanced steadily, consuming everything in its path. Above the crackling flames, he heard branches breaking, something large moving through the forest. Friend or foe, hunter or hunted, he couldn't tell. But in these hills, there were no neutral parties left. Keen had made sure of that dot. The flames danced like angry demons across the dry brush, their orange fingers reaching higher into the darkening sky. Caleb Rourke struggled against the rough ropes that bit into his wrists, his body aching from the beating Keen's men had given him. The smoke burned his eyes and scratched at his throat, making each breath a battle. Heat pressed in from all sides. Sweat ran down his face, mixing with the blood from a cut above his eye. The roar of the approaching fire drowned out everything else, a hungry beast racing toward him. Caleb knew he had minutes, maybe less. "So this is how it ends," he whispered, his voice raw. The irony wasn't lost on him. Dying alone in the wilderness he'd spent his life protecting. He thought of Rachel, hoping she was safe, hoping she could still expose Keen's cruel plan without him. The smoke thickened, and Caleb lowered his head, trying to find cleaner air near the ground. His lungs burned. The ropes hadn't loosened despite his efforts, and exhaustion weighed heavy on his limbs. The fire's warmth grew more intense with each passing second. Then, through the curtain of smoke and dancing flames, a shadow moved. At first, Caleb thought his oxygen-starved mind was playing tricks on him. But no, there was something there. Something large and graceful, moving with purpose. His heart nearly stopped when he saw her. Sela, the leopard's powerful form, emerged from the smoky haze like a spirit from his childhood memories. She was bigger now, her muscles rippling beneath her spotted coat, but he knew her instantly. The old scar across her shoulder caught the firelight as she moved. Their eyes met. In that moment, years melted away. He saw a recognition flash in those amber eyes, the same eyes that had once looked up at him trustingly as he fed her with a bottle in his father's barn. She remembered him. Instead of running from the approaching inferno, Sela began to circle him. Her movements were deliberate, protective. She paced around him like a guardian, her presence giving him renewed strength. The connection between them hummed like electricity in the smoke-filled air. He came back, Caleb managed through coughing breaths. The heat was becoming unbearable, but seeing Sela filled him with a surge of determination. He couldn't die here. Not now. Not when she had risked everything to return to him. With trembling fingers, he worked at the ropes again. Sela's continuous circling seemed to keep the flames at bay for precious seconds, creating a pocket of space around them. The fire reflected in her eyes as she moved, her own breaths coming in quick pants from the smoke. Caleb felt something give in the knots. The ropes had dried in the intense heat, becoming brittle. He twisted his wrists, ignoring the pain as the rough fibers scraped. His skin raw. Sela let out a low growl, urging him on. The sound carried through the roar of the flames, reaching something deep inside him. With a final, desperate effort, the rope snapped. Caleb's arms came free just as a wall of flame surged toward them. He stumbled to his feet, his legs weak and shaking. The world spun around him. Smoke, fire, and the solid presence of Sela still moving beside him. The bond between them, forged in the quiet moments of his childhood and tested by years of separation, had become something else entirely. This was survival in its purest form. This was trust that transcended species. This was loyalty that neither time nor distance could break. Through the thick smoke, Caleb could barely see a path to safety. But Sela was there, her body pressing against his leg, guiding him. Together they moved through the inferno, man and leopard united against the flames that threatened to consume them both. Each step was a battle against exhaustion and the searing heat, but they pushed forward in those terrifying moments. As death reached for them with burning fingers, Caleb understood something profound. His connection to Sela wasn't just about childhood memories or guilt or even redemption. It was something primal, something that spoke to the very essence of what it meant to trust and be trusted. She had come back for him, defying her wild nature to save the boy who had once saved her. The fire closed in around them, but Sela stayed by his side. Every instinct must have been screaming at her to flee, yet she remained, matching her pace to his stumbling steps. In that moment, Caleb knew with absolute certainty that he would never abandon her again. Not to Keen, not to anyone. The morning sun cast long shadows across Rachel's small cabin as Caleb gingerly pressed an ice pack against his bruised ribs. His clothes still smelled of smoke, a harsh reminder of his brush with death the night before. Rachel paced the wooden floor, her boots making soft thuds against the planks. "You could have died out there," she said, her voice tight with concern. She stopped to examine the rope burns on his wrists. Keen's not just trying to hunt Sela anymore. He's trying to eliminate anyone who stands in his way. Caleb winced as he shifted in his chair. "But now we have proof." He pulled out his phone, showing Rachel the photos he'd managed to take before the ambush. Documents linking Keen to payments made to sanctuary workers. Carefully planned schedules of cattle movements that lined up perfectly with Sela's supposed attacks. Rachel leaned in closer, her eyes scanning the evidence. "This is it, the connection we needed." She straightened up, running a hand through her hair. "But Keen's got too many people in his pocket. Taking this to the authorities might not be enough. That's why we need to force his hand," Caleb said, standing despite the pain. He walked to the window, looking out at the mountains where he knew Sela was hiding. Last night, when she came for me in the fire, she remembered. After all these years, she remembered. Rachel touched his arm gently. "Your father was wrong, you know. What you did for her as a boy, what you're doing now, it's not weakness. It's the kind of strength this land needs." Caleb turned to face her, something resolute settling in his chest. "There's a valley about 3 miles east of where they set the fire. It's where I've been tracking her movements. The terrain there, it's perfect." Rachel's eyes widened with understanding. "You want to lure Keen there? He's desperate now. He knows we have evidence against him. If we let word slip about Sila's location," Caleb paused, mapping out the plan in his mind, "he'll come himself. He'll want to finish this personally." They spent the next hours preparing. Rachel contacted trusted journalists, preparing them for what might unfold. Caleb studied topographical maps, marking escape routes and vantage points. They gathered cameras, documentation, and emergency supplies. The risk isn't just Keen, Rachel reminded him as she packed a first aid kit. You'll be putting yourself between two predators, one human, one wild. Caleb checked his satellite phone signal. Selah had every reason to attack me in that fire. Instead, she protected me. I have to trust that bond one more time. As evening approached, they loaded their gear into Rachel's truck. The plan was set. They would leak information about Selah's whereabouts through carefully chosen channels, knowing it would reach Keen within hours. Then they would wait in the valley, ready to document whatever came next. Rachel caught Caleb's hand before he could climb into the truck. "Your compassion," she said firmly. "The very thing your father tried to beat out of you. It's what's going to win this fight. You understand both sides of this story because you cared enough to see them." Caleb squeezed her hand, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones. Years of carrying his father's shame about his connection to Selah fell away. In its place stood something stronger. The certainty that his choice to protect rather than destroy had always been right. They drove toward the valley as the sun began to set, the Montana landscape stretching vast and wild around them. Everything they needed was packed. Cameras, evidence files, emergency flares, and medical supplies. But their strongest weapon was the truth they carried, about Keen's manipulation, about the possibility of coexistence, about the power of choosing compassion over fear. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Caleb said as they set up their observation point, "we show people there's another way, that you don't have to destroy what you fear." Rachel nodded, her expression determined in the fading light. "We show them that the real predator isn't the one with claws and fangs. It's the one who uses fear to control others." As darkness settled over the valley, they made final preparations for the confrontation to come. Somewhere in the shadows, Selah prowled her territory, an unwitting player in tomorrow's dangerous game. Caleb touched the old scar on his jaw, a reminder of his father's lessons about strength. For the first time, he felt no shame in rejecting those lessons. True strength, he now knew, lay in standing between the hunters and the hunted, between cruelty and compassion. The trap was set. Come morning, they would face Keen with evidence, courage, and an unshakable belief that protecting the wild didn't make them weak. It made them human. The dawn painted Montana's rugged landscape in shades of amber and gold as Eldon Keen marched through the wilderness, his expensive boots crushing the underbrush with each determined step. His rifle gleamed in the early light, and his face was twisted with a mixture of rage and triumph. Behind him, 4 armed men followed, their weapons at the ready. Caleb watched from his hidden position among the rocks, his heart pounding but his hands steady. He could feel Rachel's presence nearby, though he couldn't see her. They had planned this carefully, knowing Keen's pride would drive him to make this final hunt personal. "Come out, Rock," Keen's voice boomed across the clearing. "I know you're here protecting that beast." Caleb emerged from his cover, standing tall despite his still healing injuries. "It's over, Keen. You've lost." Keen's laugh echoed off the canyon walls. "Lost? I've got you cornered, boy. You and that criminal cat of yours." He raised his rifle, aiming it at Caleb's chest. "Step aside." A low growl rumbled from the shadows of the trees. Selah's sleek form moved through the undergrowth, her muscles rippling beneath her spotted coat. Keen's men shifted nervously, there, weapons tracking her movement. "You engineered all of this," Caleb said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Bribing the sanctuary workers, setting that fire, all to control the ranchers through fear." "Prove it," Keen sneered, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Rachel stepped out from behind a boulder, holding up a small recorder. Her voice was steady as she pressed play. Keen's own words filled the air. Release the cat. Make it look natural. Once people are scared enough, they'll beg me to protect them. The color drained from Keen's face. His men exchanged uneasy glances, lowering their weapons slightly. That's not all, Rachel continued, her finger hovering over the device. We have you discussing the arson, the beatings, everything. It's already been transmitted to the authorities. Keen's composure cracked. His eyes darted wildly between Caleb, Rachel, and the shadows where Sela lurked. In that moment, he looked less like a powerful rancher and more like a cornered animal. You think anyone will believe you? He snarled, but his voice shook. I own this county. A twig snapped, and Sela emerged fully into view. The morning light caught the scar across her shoulder, a reminder of her captivity. Keen swung his rifle toward her, his finger tightening on the trigger. Without hesitation, Caleb moved. He positioned himself between Keen and Sela, spreading his arms wide. Rachel gasped, but held her ground. You'll have to shoot through me first, Caleb said quietly. The words carried echoes of his childhood, of a boy who once defied his father to protect a helpless cub. But now he stood as a man, his compassion no longer a weakness, but his greatest strength. You're just like your old man said, weak. Keen's hands trembled on the rifle. That animal is a killer. The only killer here is you, Keen, Caleb replied. Behind him, Sela remained still, her golden eyes fixed on the scene before her. The trust between man and Leopard was palpable, a bond forged in fire and survival. The distant sound of helicopters filled the air. Keen's head snapped up, panic replacing his anger as he recognized the approaching law enforcement. His men began backing away, dropping their weapons. It's finished, Rachel said, stepping closer to Caleb. The evidence is clear. Your empire of fear is over. Keen's finger tightened on the trigger, desperation etched across his features. But before he could fire, Sela let out a bone-chilling roar. The sound echoed through the canyon, primal and powerful. Keen stumbled backward, his rifle slipping from his grasp. State police vehicles appeared on the ridge above, their sirens piercing the morning quiet. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, shouting commands. Keen's men surrendered immediately, hands raised high. But Keen himself made one last desperate lunge for his fallen rifle. Caleb tensed, ready to move, but there was no need. Sela's powerful form flashed past him, not to attack, but to stand between Keen and the weapon. Her message was clear. Enough violence. The officers swarmed down the slope, quickly surrounding Keen. As they read him his rights, the fight seemed to drain out of him. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time, he looked old and defeated. Rachel moved to Caleb's side, slipping her hand into his. Together, they watched as Sela melted back into the forest shadows. She paused at the tree line, turning to look at Caleb one last time. In that gaze was years of shared history, trust, and understanding. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Montana wilderness as justice finally caught up with Eldon Keen. State police vehicles surrounded the wealthy rancher, their lights flashing against the weathered rocks. Keen's face, usually masked with arrogance, crumpled as officers approached with handcuffs. You can't do this to me, he snarled, but his voice carried none of its former power. I own this valley. Caleb Rourke stood quietly beside Rachel Vance, watching as the man who had terrorized the community for so long was led away. The evidence against Keen was overwhelming. Recorded conversations about bribing sanctuary workers, documentation of orchestrated fear campaigns, and multiple witnesses to the attempted murder by fire. His carefully constructed empire began crumbling within hours. It's really over, Rachel whispered, squeezing Caleb's hand. Her warm touch anchored him in the moment, but the hardest part was yet to come. a team of wildlife specialists arrived. The next day, equipped to safely capture and relocate Sela, Caleb knew it was necessary. She couldn't stay in Montana, where Keen's influence had poisoned too many minds against predators. Still, his heart ached as he watched them prepare. The tranquilizer darts. "She have a good life?" Rachel assured him, her voice gentle. "The sanctuary in India has thousands of acres of protected land. Should be free there." Caleb nodded, unable to speak. They tracked Sela to a quiet valley where she seemed to be waiting for them. The leopard's eyes found Caleb's across the distance, and in that moment, he saw the same trust he'd recognized in her as a cub. The dart hit its mark cleanly, and Caleb stayed with her until her eyes drifted closed as they loaded her into the transport cage. Memories flooded back. The small boy sneaking milk to a starving cub, his father's harsh words about weakness, the years of shame that followed. But now, watching Sela's chest rise and fall peacefully, Caleb finally understood. His compassion hadn't been weakness at all. It had been the strength that saved them both. The following weeks brought sweeping changes. Keen's arrest exposed decades of corruption. Properties were returned to rightful owners, and the ranching community began healing. Rachel's wildlife protection programs gained support, with several ranchers even volunteering to help monitor local predator populations. One crisp morning, Caleb received confirmation that Sela had arrived safely at her new home. The photo showed her exploring dense jungle, powerful and free. He traced a familiar scar across her shoulder in the image, remembering the frightened cub she'd once been. "You're not much like your father, are you?" Rachel said, studying his face as he looked at the photo. "And that's the best thing about you." Caleb felt the last shadows of shame lift from his heart. "No," he agreed. "I'm not. Took me long enough to be grateful for that." Rachel smiled, taking his hand. "Some lessons are worth the wait." Standing there in the clear Montana morning, Caleb felt truly free for the first time. His father's voice no longer echoed in his head, telling him that kindness made him weak. Instead, he heard his own truth. Compassion had given him the strength to save Sela, to stand up to Keen, to find love with Rachel, and finally, to save himself. The old barn where he'd once hidden a leopard cub still stood on his family's land. But now, instead of holding secrets and shame, it represented something different. The power of choosing love over fear, of standing firm in what you believe, even when the whole world tells you you're wrong. "What now?" Rachel asked, her eyes bright with possibility. Caleb pulled her close, feeling the warmth of new beginnings. "Now we keep working. There are other animals that need protection, other battles worth fighting." He paused, looking out over the land he'd learned to see with new eyes. "And this time, we do it together." The sunrise painted the mountains gold, just as it had on that long-ago morning when a young boy first chose kindness over fear. But now the light touched a different man, one who understood that the very compassion he'd been taught to despise had become his greatest strength. If you believe stories can heal, lift, and connect us, this channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real.